D'accord. Bonjour, mesdames et messieurs. Aujourd'hui, je codé mon app called Yes, and that's my combination of Parisian French and French Canadian, which is basically to say that welcome, ladies and gentlemen, programmers and subscriptors. You're watching, I think, episode 14 of live coding, but to be honest, I don't really know. But it's not especially important, it's just a number. What is important is that we're going to get some coding done today. So I got a pretty fun episode planned. And what's up? We got Al and Marcin. Good to see you. So I'll just wait a couple moments here, and then we'll kind of just dive into things. But hopefully everyone's having a good Monday, whether it's the evening or not. So while we're at it, let's just get the usual preamble out of the way. So recently I've basically been on a mass social media campaign to basically increase the reach of the WiseAss community. So as many people have probably noticed over the years, if you've been watching me for some time, social media and editing and content organization are all things that I am just really bad at. And the reason why I'm really bad at it is because I really had to prioritize being good at what I do and learning really hard before I wanted to prioritize winning popularity contests. So while on one hand that certainly, you know, in some regards that's not necessarily the best idea, but I would just like to emphasize to everyone, if you're in a position where you do want to do anything like I do, don't ever assume that the most important thing for you to do is to just be the biggest star, because I have seen people, to digress for a moment, in this community, teachers who were, gained, I won't name any names, but gained quite a bit of success quite quickly through being exceptionally good at content production and search engine optimization and so forth, but didn't spend so much time worrying about whether their content was good or accurate, or whether people were learning useful things from it. So, but with that being said, I'll do my best to share my efforts regarding improving my own social media, web presence and things like that. And like everything else with this channel, I'll do my best to share it with you. So with that in mind, we do now have an Instagram account for WiseAss. So if you do follow, we've got all the usual stuff. We've got Facebook, we've got Instagram now. I've got some articles up on Medium, and I'll be posting to Medium somewhat regularly. And all the usual stuff, the Slack channel. So do us a favor, if you do enjoy content from me, and also just the WiseAss community in general, which you can get in touch with via the Slack channel, then please do consider supporting me on your different preferred social media networks. So that's basically it for the preamble for today. Just hop into the chat really quick, and it looks. Hopefully my stream is working properly. Google is telling me that my stream output is low, so what I should do is get the early demo done really quickly. So our itinerary for today is to basically do an overview of the architecture for SpaceNotes, which is this application I'm demoing right here. I'm going to be making a login feature. And so I'll kind of show you that process when I get to it. I'll show you the little sketch I made and so forth. And then we'll also consider, I'm not sure how far we'll get, but we might start building out the model view logic for the login feature. And if you're wondering what model view logic is, that's basically my way of saying I don't care about other people's labels anymore. I'm just going to call things what I think they should be called. So apologies about that. If you're really confused, you can basically assume it means something like model view controller or model view presenter, because that's basically what a controller is and what a presenter is. It's a logic class, so that's why I call it as such. So anyways, I need to do the demo right away because my computer is churning. And so let's just get started. This is the current state of the SpaceNotes application. This is like an empty screen state, and as you can see, it looks pretty damn ugly on the emulator, but there's just a couple animations going on to make it look less terrible. I'll add, to show you that the local data source or local repository is functioning, let me just add a note. Again, still going to be working on the user interface a little bit here, but this is a note. Welcome to WiseAss. Okay, and then I'm going to hit the done button up here. And as you can see, we do have the note item showing up here. The formatting is a little messed up, so there's still obviously a lot of tweaking to do here, but I'm just happy that I got, you know, the basic local database working properly. It's been a while since I've built a room database, so it was nice to practice that and just get it working properly. So what we're going to do is this button up here is going to take us to the login screen once I've actually built it. So that's basically what I'm going to focus on implementing today, is this login feature. And yeah, that's basically it. So we can get into the finer specifics of how I'm going to be doing the login flow later. But I'm just going to stop my emulator. It might crash. Oh no. Okay, my whole stream might crash because... Okay, good. It got rid of the emulator. It looks like we might have a black screen issue. Thank you, Android Studio Emulator, for consistently ruining my graphics card. That's very kind of you. Okay. So, in OBS Studio, I'm getting a black screen. There we go. Okay, I think we're back to normal. So that's always the issue with me doing these demos, is that you know, between Android Studio and Chrome open and OBS Studio going, when I run the emulator, it's, you know, it's asking a lot. So anyways, that's fine. So yeah, emulators in 2018, you know, you'd think that we could figure this stuff out. Maybe it's really difficult. I'm assuming that's the case, but yeah. Anyways, carrying on. So for the first thing we're going to do today, do me a favor, the YouTube is screaming at me that my YouTube streaming is not working well. So if it's really choppy or anything, please do let me know in the comments, because I don't know 100% how well it's working right now based on what Google is telling me. Anyways, we will carry on. Here we go. Yep, so first let's talk about the architecture overview of the application. Okay, thanks Al, I appreciate that. Looks like the video streaming is working decently well. Okay, so let's get started here. I'm actually going to sit down with my tall chair and we'll just get started with some coding. Okay, so what I wanted to do just right off the bat here, there we go, is talk about just really quickly the end-to-end architecture and just give it a quick summary. Now I'm getting OCD about the camera. Just so everyone's up to speed with what it looks like. So let's get started with that. So what I'll do is I'll take you, as I say, kind of end to end through the architecture, and let me show you a quick diagram that sort of illustrates it. Just give me a moment. So this is sort of a rough idea. So we have a view a presenter, which I now call logic. We have a ViewModel, oops, wrong side. So that's going to be front-end persistence. There's a use case or interactor, whatever you want to call it, I don't really care. And these are just representative backend services. So that's the basic structure. Is basically, if I were to use terms which are familiar to most people, it basically looks like model view presenter plus a view model for front-end data storage. And I'll show you really quickly how I propagate events and stuff like that, and then we'll get to some live coding. So let me run through this as quickly as possible, because I can tell I'm starting to ramble already, as usual. Hopefully that's not a big deal. And let me just fix the thing on the side here. There we go. Here we go. It's actually still telling me that my video output is low, so the YouTube live stream. Anyways, that's fine. I'll deal. So we'll start. So just a quick tip for everybody watching. In Android Studio, as opposed to using the Project Explorer to locate files, I would strongly suggest you use either the go-to file shortcut or the go-to class shortcut. So go-to file is Control-Shift-N. So if you want to find your layout files, you might say, for example, let's say just layout, let's say fragment. Then you can find your XML. If you want to look up a class, you hit Control-N. And then we can just start typing the name, and we'll go to, I think, let's go to note list view, and we'll start here. So Naline mentions, says, I'd like to try your architecture for my next big project. I am honored to hear that, but you know, don't necessarily assume that what I would suggest to you is also feel free to, like, if you want to experiment and do something different, certainly give it a shot. Because I don't, that's basically how I learn architecture, is I tried a whole bunch of different styles and saw what I like. So anyways, glad to hear that. So we have our view. So this is just unequivocally a view class. It shouldn't be really, I'll address that MVVM comment in a moment. So this is just a view, very simple. I keep my views very dumb, or I follow what is kind of referred to as a subset of model view presenter, or a style of that called passive view, or I think maybe humble view is another name, although that could be pointing to some other concept. But the basic gist of it is I don't want logic in my views. Now obviously, yeah, I'm calling a series of commands in the view, and so this is a place where I have to be especially careful about what's going on. But this is the kind of thing that I would test basically by using the application. You could also test it using Espresso, but you know, I have a limited patience for, I already spend a lot of time writing unit tests, so that's one thing I'm just not super into at the moment. And then another thing, currently we do start activities through the fragment. I would like to change that and have some external class manage the changes between activities, but I don't think it will be through the navigation from Android Jetpack, because I don't like that it basically creates my fragments for me. I can't really have that the way this application is built. But I do want some external object, and you know, whether I use Google's implementation of it or I use my own, you know, it's not a big deal. Either way, I'll learn. And then of course we have, so we talk to the logic class and through the view. Now, one of the things I wanted to avoid is I didn't want the view to have a whole bunch of different methods to call on the logic class. Instead, I kind of wanted to represent these potential actions in the view through what I call just events, different events. So you'll notice whenever I actually tell the view about something, other than there's two exceptions. There's logic.clear and logic.bind. Those are the two exceptions. But in terms of user interface events, I have this thing called note list event, and then it has a subset of events. So let me jump into that and we'll see what that looks like. Let's go to the contract. So iNoteList contract, there we go. So notice in these contract classes, I have basically interfaces for all of the different things that I would like to represent. Let me zoom in a little so that's clear. And then in the bottom, because Kotlin is amazing, I can just slap in a sealed class down here. And this sealed class basically represents every potential event which can propagate from the view. Now, most of the time I'm really just saying to the logic class, hey, something's going on. A new node has been clicked, login has been clicked, whatever. In this particular case, I need an actual position, but this thing here does not get called by the view. That gets called by the adapter, which also is capable of contacting or talking to the logic class through an interface. That was a kind of a challenge, actually decoupling the view from the adapter and then making sure that everything still coordinates and works properly. Because the unfortunate thing about RecyclerView adapters is that they are inherently tightly coupled to the view and tightly coupled to Android. So that was, you know, it takes some logical progression to get those things to wire together nicely. But this is just a basic RecyclerViewList adapter. So nothing really special going on here. What I'll do is let's go to oh boy. I'll open up the logic, note list logic. We'll talk about that next. I'm just going to pause for one quick moment to address the chat. So CP says, I think MVVM is much superior to MVP, but at my work we stuck with MVP for most of the projects. I wouldn't actually be so bold as to say that Model View Presenter or Model View ViewModel, one of them is superior to the other. I actually take elements of both architectures. You might be more experienced than I, and you may be able to actually make that judgment, but I would advise people listening, just because Google threw their weight behind Model View ViewModel and they want you to do it kind of their way, my experience has been actually what I tend to find is that different architectures work best in different contexts. And one of the biggest problems I have with Model View ViewModel is designing views which have a lot of different logic and states, potential states. And so if you want to handle that in Model View ViewModel, you end up having to fill your view model up with a whole bunch of logic, and then we have a pretty big separation of concerns problem. So what I would advise to people is, you know, certainly take some lessons from Model View ViewModel and from Model View Presenter, but I wouldn't advise really saying this is better than the other. And a lot of people kind of, how should I say it? A lot of people like to say statements. I'm guilty of it too. I crap on Model View ViewModel a lot, but if you don't actually know it in code, you know, your opinion is going to be questionable, including mine. I mean that for everyone. Next we have, so this isn't my Q&A, but I'll try and answer these questions quickly. Rahul says, how do I convince my manager to convert Java to Kotlin? He has no knowledge of Java or Kotlin, and he's the chief technological officer. So I don't have a great answer for you because I would really have to unpack that a lot, and this isn't the Q&A, but just simply put, you're going to have to either find whatever leverage you can use, which it doesn't sound like you're going to be able to convince this person from a technical perspective why Kotlin is better. So maybe perhaps approach it from the perspective of the efficiency you will gain from the fact that you can typically write, I believe it's about 40% less code in Kotlin compared to Java. So just good luck with that. If all else fails, look for another job, my friend. Next we have, let's see. Okay, that sounds like basically it. And sorry, Mahesh, I'm not going to answer that question. I can't tell you what my suggestion, Mahesh, is go with what you're interested in and try not to just focus on what other people tell you in this case, because you're going to be able to build Android applications in Java, you're going to be able to build it in Kotlin, you're going to be able to build it in Flutter. I have my personal preferences and biases, which are for Kotlin, but I'm not going to just tell you to do what I do. Follow what interests you. Anyways, let's get back to coding. So, back to note list logic. So how this class works is it's basically like the logic center of the front end of the application. So it coordinates a view model. This view model exists here so that this logic class does not need to store state, and the view does not need to store state. And when I mean state, I'm referring specifically to front-end session state. So the kind of thing that is not relevant necessarily to the back end, it's more relevant to the front end, like it has an effect on the user interface and needs to be persisted. In that case, I have my special little front-end data container, which is a view model. I'll jump into that really quickly. It's just a very simple, it's about what you would assume a view model would look like, as I like to say. It doesn't make decisions, it stores basically the model of the view. So it's not coordinating anything. Anyways, really quickly, so the list, the logic classes, what they do is they coordinate the front end, and they will also ask the back end, or the middleware class, that's going to get tricky to explain, for whatever data it requires. So in this case, we have three different data sources here. We have a private note source, so that's when the user is not in public mode, and we have a public note source, which is when the user is in public mode. I'll explain that later, we haven't implemented yet. Then we have an auth source, which is where I will be basically authenticating the user. Now, when I say private note source, it's important to recognize that the private note source both has a local and a remote repository, whereas the public note source will only have a remote repository. So, anyways, carrying on. All right. So how this basically works is the view will note list. Sorry, my neighbors are making a bunch of noise outside. How this will basically work is the come on, brain, you can do this. So we will call some event on the logic class. So am I? Yeah, I'm in view. So let's say, where do I register the events? What events do we have here? Okay, here we go. Yeah, whatever. So when onStart is called, we're ready to start grabbing the data from the data source. So I call notelistEvent.onStart, which of course comes from here in iNoteListContract. Then we hop into the logic view, and then I have this kind of like there's probably a name for this thing I have here. I'm not aware of what it is, but I think this is a pattern. So I have an event which is capable of, I think it might be the command pattern or the strategy pattern, one of those two. Anyways, I'll talk about that in a moment, Taha, but that's an interesting question. Anyways, so I basically delegate to some method in the logic class based on this event. And why this is really nice, why I really like this pattern, is when I get into the test class, so notelist logic test, then basically all I want to do is I'll generate some event object. So for example, onStart. I'll specify whatever details about it I want to specify. So in this case, we call onStart with an empty list. We call onStart with data, a test note list. And then so that allows me to kind of test each of these events and really get good code coverage, because what am I testing in my unit tests? I just make sure that all of these are covered properly. So I'm not sure if I have 100% of them, but I've got most of them in my test class, as you can see here. So once it's time to say talk to the backend database, what we do is we say, what's a good example? So let's go back to onStart. So we call onStart, which is down here. I make sure that my job tracker object is present. This is very similar, let's say similar to composite disposable from RxJava 2. If you're familiar with RxJava 2, this is a very similar principle here, this job tracker. I can clear it to tear things down. So we get that going, and then we call getListData. And so this is when we're going to get the data from the appropriate data source. So if the user is in private mode, we'll do the private list data. If the user's, let me zoom in. If the user is in public mode, we'll get the public data. For now, I haven't implemented public data, so we won't even worry about that. So because coroutines are fricking amazing, and this is like one of the biggest reasons why I think you should switch to Kotlin, or sorry, I think you should consider switching to Kotlin, is coroutines are amazing. They allow you to write asynchronous code in a what's called direct style, or a sort of sequential style, sequential blocking style, even though the code is not blocking the main thread. And so I just ask the data source for the data I want, and then I check. This will happen asynchronously. You can see there's a suspension point here. So this will suspend this function until, in this case, the private data is loaded, the data result is assigned. Then we check what happened. So sometimes the backend might throw an error. I haven't implemented that yet, but we check for that case, and then we do things appropriately. So when it's time to render the view, just this morning I added in a special little, just a bit of logic here. So if the result is empty, I show an empty state, which is where you saw the empty state with the loading, the satellite image loading. So I'll tell it to do that. Otherwise, I'll tell it to show the list. I still submit the list to the adapter because if the users, I'm not sure if this is what I want to do yet, but the user is going to be able to switch between private and public mode in the list activity. So I think I'm going to want to reuse the same instance of the adapter, and I do have it configured with a diffutil, but I haven't actually tested this out, so I'm not saying this is actually implemented properly, but eventually. Diffutil is kind of how you figure out, it helps your recycler view change when the data set changes, in simple terms. So that's basically it. All I really want to talk about for logic. Let's hop into just public or private data source, rather, private node source. So I was working with channels and with the channel coroutine, and one of the problems I was running into is so in order to access data from room, I had to switch threads. So you'll notice I say async dispatchers.io, because if I didn't do that, then if I hop into local here, that's going to be called local, room, database simple. Before I was calling methods on the DAO. So really quickly, some people might be a little bit confused by what this looks like here. Just a quick Kotlin tip. So if your function can be represented in a single line, a single expression, then you don't have to do the curly brackets for the function body. You can actually just get rid of the curly brackets and just do an equals sign, exactly like you see here. So if you're ever kind of confused about, like, sometimes you look at Kotlin and you'll see little things like this. Actually, Al and I were commenting on some of the Lambda syntax and stuff. If you're ever kind of surprised about Kotlin syntax, there's little things like that you have to keep in mind. So I could rewrite this function like this. Oops, let me just copy and paste that in, and then say return. So I could write it that way, but that's less efficient. I can actually write it in a single line, and because it's a single expression, I don't need a return statement. It knows that I want to return this automatically, and I don't need the body of the function as long as it can be represented in a single line. So just a little quick tip for Kotlin there, in case that was confusing to you at all. Anyways, moving on. So what I was saying before is that I was trying to call noteDAO.getNoteById or whatever. I was just trying to talk to the room database, and I was getting this error, which the error was basically you can't access room on the main thread. So in many cases with coroutines, you don't actually need to switch threads, but in some cases you do. And so what I did is I couldn't get it to work properly with channels. I couldn't get it to necessarily call back to the main thread properly. Maybe there's a way. I couldn't get it to work, but I did manage to get it working with using async, and so I'm not necessarily that upset about not being able to use channels here, but I do want to explore channels and actors a little better. So anyways, Control-Alt-L. Looks like Taha wants me to format something. You mean this? Or I'm not sure which one. Anyways, carrying on. Yeah, that's the basic gist of it. So we ask the local data source for the data, and currently I do ask the remote for data, but I don't do anything with it because I haven't configured it 100%. Just to show you really quickly what remote looks like. So that'll be Firebase. It's not really implemented yet, but it'll just be another data source, and it'll talk to Firebase database. I've got it partially implemented, but I still need to do a lot of configuration there. So eventually what will happen is we will basically, I'll have to write logic to basically coordinate which data to prioritize, when to like request more data from remote, and those kinds of things. So that's been something I've been talking about and trying to do for a while, and so hopefully I'll be able to get to that soon. It's been taking a while because I've been busy with a lot of other stuff, but we're getting there. Anyways, I feel like I might have to sneeze in a moment. Apologies if I do. Okay, so that's pretty much the end-to-end architecture. One final note, as opposed to giving my interactor or use case or whatever you want to call it, as opposed to holding reference to local and remote in this class itself, I actually just always, I'm basically trying to take a more functional approach, which is to basically give a function everything it needs and avoid shared mutable state. And so that's kind of the reason why I'm doing that. I can't sneeze. It won't come out. Anyways, so yeah, I think that's all I want to say there. So again, what I'll do is I'll just run a quick commercial break, and then we'll just address some comments. And if you're using an ad blocker, then you get to wait with everybody else. Okay, we're good to go. So, once again, addressing comments here. So, Taha asks, having a reference of the sort of the adapter inside the logic class, wouldn't that cause memory leaks? So I don't have a, I don't know for sure. I will have to test that with Leak Canary. It's difficult to say. So that is definitely a concern, but I don't really have an answer for you. So the issue here is that there's potential to have memory leaks with adapters. I don't actually hold on to context as far as I'm aware. So when this adapter fires, it gets what it needs. It does get it does work with context, but it gets it only when in a functional style. It doesn't hold reference to a context object. So I'm not actually sure if that's going to make things safe. I should still test it with Leak Canary, but that was one of the things. That's a big issue with the RecyclerView adapter, as I said before, is that it's tightly coupled to the View and by extension the Android operating system. So those are definitely concerns. What else have we got? Yes. So CP, I'll just call you, said I refactored a whole project from Java to Kotlin at my work, and it's really helpful. I agree 100%. That's actually how I first learned how to write Kotlin, and for everyone watching, the fastest way you will learn Kotlin is to, if you come from a Java background, I should say. If you come from a Java background and you want to switch to Kotlin and you want to do it quickly, the best thing you should do is rebuild an application you have already built in Kotlin. You've already built it in Java, rebuild it in Kotlin. The reason why I say that is if you do that, then instead of worrying about building a new application and solving those problems in the problem domain of the application, those are already solved because you already built the application. So instead, we're rebuilding an app and getting the practice of the typing and just learning how to become comfortable with Kotlin syntax. And we're focusing on that as opposed to solving problems in the problem domain. So I'm very happy to hear that someone else did that. And for anyone watching, if you want to learn Kotlin, don't jump into the documentation and go laundry list. I'm going to try and learn every topic. That's not going to work unless you're a very, very special human being. And yeah, I would suggest, like always, follow a project-based learning approach. I think that's going to support you better in long term. Taha says he's not using an ad blocker, but ads don't show up in Syria. So that's okay, man. I know you got my back, so it's all good. That's funny though. Yeah, so I think that's basically it for comments for now. So we'll get back to coding. So that was the architecture overview. So we'll call that done. So this morning I did some very, very basic sketches of my of the UI I'm going to be building. It basically just has two states. Oops, sorry. So in state number 1, the user is signed in. In state number 2, the user is not signed in. So I don't actually store the user, and I don't think I will store anything but a user ID. And even then, I'm not sure if it will be associated with auth. So yeah. Sorry, I'm just planning in things in my head while I talk. So anyways, what we'll do is in order to write to the remote storage, the user has to be signed in. And then also in order to activate public mode, the user must also be signed in. Oh, sore shoulder. So that's basically what we'll be working on. It's going to be a very, very simple screen. And to be honest, I'm not actually sure if I will even bother with... I'm going to build this initially not with a fragment. So I'm... Whoa, webcam is adjusting there. What I'm going to do is, because this feature is just so simple, I'm probably actually just going to use an activity for the view. I will still have some layer of abstraction, but I'm literally basing the entire UI off of like a single state, which it will be whether the user is logged in or not. So for me to go through all of the trouble of building the fragment view, and then the logic class, and then the view model, and then writing, well, I'll probably still test it, but, and then setting all of that stuff up. What I'm going to try and do is actually, for the first time probably in my Android career, be a little more pragmatic and just accept that I can probably just use an activity in this case, as much as I always encourage people not to use activities. That was a good voice crack. Thank you for watching. Peace out, CP. So, anyways, let's get started building that UI. I wonder when I'm going to hit puberty. Anyways, Christ, I'm 25 and my voice still cracks all the time. Okay, let's go. So I'm actually going to need to create this thing, of course. So I'm going to hit Alt-1 to open the Project Explorer. And I'm going to create a new feature in the app module. And we're going to call this one login. So we'll start with package. Oops, and then I'm going to right click on that. I know that's hard to see, so I'll narrate what I'm doing. Glad I got some laughs out of my voice cracking. Just a pro tip for everyone watching. If your voice cracks when you're public speaking, the key to dealing with that is to make it funny, because if you get self-conscious about it, then you're not doing it right. Roll with it. Anyways, carrying on. I know I don't actually make UIs very often. Nalayan states that this is the first time he's seen me make a UI. It's going to be a very boring one, but I promise with Catalyst we will be making more complicated user interfaces. So I'm going to go to New Activity. I'll use the wizard. I'll select Empty Activity. And we're going to call this Login Activity. I can't spell. We will generate a layout file, backwards compatibility, whatever. For source language, we will definitely pick Kotlin. And let's just whip that up. So it's going to run I believe it's going to run Gradle sync and whatnot, so there's might be a bit of lag here. Okay, great. So, there we go again. So, what I'll do is I'll just right-click those and add them to the repository. Okay, and so let's go ahead and add the things that I know I want. So I will still have a logic class, I think. I think I'll omit the view, the fragment and the view model in this case. So carrying on, let's go to come on brain, you can do this, derp. So we'll call this login logic. That's quite the alliteration that's called in English. Login logic, and What else are we going to do? I don't think I might not even bother with a... Should I bother with an interface? I don't think I actually need to bother... Oh, screw it. I guess it's not that much of a investment. We'll see. I might actually end up deleting this thing. Oops, I just selected Java class. That's not going to work. Let's do Kotlin. There we go. So we're going to call this iLogin contract. Again, this might be a totally superfluous class. Superfluous is a big fancy English word for useless. So let's say let's represent a interface view. We'll just call it that, interface view. Let me just make sure I'm doing this how I normally do it. Where's that contract? So I deleted it, so let's hit Control N, I note detail contract. Yep, let's do that one. Okay, I was doing that properly. So let's go to the thing I just created. Where did it go? I have too many things open. Okay, I don't know where that class I just made went, but it's probably just complaining because I didn't do that. Fair enough. Fair enough, Android Studio, that was my bad. So we'll make a logic. Let's do fun event, and that's going to pass, when I call this, some kind of event, and then we'll make a class called herp derp. What am I going to call it? Let's call it iLogin. No, let's call it, what did I call it in the other thing? Okay, login event. Let's do that. So again, I'm going to make a sealed class. Let's just copy and paste so that I'm not wasting anyone's time here. And let's see here. So so this is going to be login event. Okay, and we'll delete most of these. So since I'm going to have basically a sign-in, just a sign-in button or a sign-out button, I'll base the events on that. And let's go to oh, sorry, I'm in full screen mode. I apologize about that. Not sure how long I was on that for. Okay, so let's do on login click, and we'll do on, what did I call it, sign out? Let's say log out just for consistency's sake. On logout click. And so I think, yeah, that's probably the only events which I actually need to represent in this particular case. So let's go to get, add those two in. Okay, so and then we'll hop into what are we going to do next? So let's build the user interface next before I get too carried away with this stuff. I will build a test class, so we can add that in. And what we'll do is we'll right click on here. Why don't I just copy and paste it? That's probably actually a quicker method, and we're going to call this login logic test. Okay, and just rename this login logic test. It's not going to need any data sources. It will need auth, and I'll piss around with the test class later. Let's just get into some UI stuff because I think that's all we'll have time for. Okay, so yeah, git add. Then we'll hop into what's it called? Activity, Control-Shift-N, activity login. Okay, so what I wanted to do is let's start with a background. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up a tab, a layout on the side, so that I'm not literally doing this blindly, because that would be silly. And so let's do fragment detail. So I won't be able to see the chat just for a, well, actually, why don't I see if I can make that happen. Let's just do a half screen there. That should work fine, okay. So first and foremost, we're going to give this thing a background. So I'm going to say Android background is at drawable. Got YouTube showing me, what do you call those? Push notifications. I forgot what they call them here. Anyways, so background is going to be at drawable / space loop, which is like a space background. There we go. Is that visible somewhat? Okay, let's do just the design so that you guys can see that reasonably well. Okay, and then we're going to have a label. So let's just blast this shit off. Pardon my language. Okay. For now, I will wrestle with the design editor here. Okay, so what do I want this to look like? So, got our text view. So this is, so what we'll start with is we'll just set the bounds. So I'll just set the top, and I won't do the bottom bound just yet. I'm not going to fiddle around in the visual editor to do a lot of this stuff. So I want this thing to be, let's say, so the width should be, I will actually fiddle around a little bit. Take me to the thing I want to see here, please. There we go. They changed the design of the constraint layout since I last used it, so we'll see how well I do with this. Yep, there we go. Okay, wrap content is good. For margin, probably going to worry about that later, but let's just set it to 16 for now, and 16 and 16. This doesn't really matter because the text is going to be centered, but I'll just slap it in there anyways. And we're going to say for just for the design preview, we will say login status. And so so just a brief note here. So when it comes to whether you should decide to style something using say styles, or to do it directly in the XML, my general suggestion is if you only ever have one of a given view, then you can actually get away with just doing all the styling in the file that it exists in, as opposed to delegating that to styles. But in this in this particular case, I will do that, partly out of laziness. I will use some base styles here though that I have. So I'm going to hit Control-Shift-N, and what should I use as a base here? Let's say text.primary to begin with, and then you know what, I think I actually will. I'm going to go back on what I said. I'm changing my mind. I'm flip-flopping like a politician, but let's just make a bloody style for it. And we'll say, so this is going to be text.primary dot, let's say log, login header, because I might have the text below it also have the same style, so that's why I flip-flopped there. So how this basically works is when you follow this convention. Oh, I hear sirens outside. Sounds like my ride's here. I swear I did not do it. I did not do it. Anyways, if you follow this naming convention with styles, it basically allows for inheritance. So text.primary inherits from text, so we can overwrite things. This is actually kind of pointless now that I see that. Because I'm overwriting everything that I inherit, but I don't know, I'll just leave that be for now. That's kind of silly now that I think of it. But let's keep calm and carry on, as the British say, you know. Keep calm, carry on. So this is going to be a big ass text, and I think I'm going to do, oops, 2 is not big ass. Let's do, I think, light. And is there anything else I need to worry about for text color? Let's do item. Actually, text color might be fine by default. Let's just add that in and see what it looks like. So I also know that I'll want it to be centered, so I can add that in. So we'll say gravity center. Okay, and let's go here. And so to import a style from your styles, you type this style thing, we go at style, so that was in view styles. I don't need to specify that. It's all relegated to styles, so let's go to text.primary.login header. Okay, hard to see. I want that a little bigger. Let's do 24. Yeah, that's a little nicer. And I definitely want a lot more padding from the top. So let's start with 32, I think is a good specification there. And then I'm going to have another one below it. So let's drag that in. All right, let's just clean this up a little bit. Drag that in. Center it. Just slap it to the bottom of that one. I do like constraint layouts. I used to have to do a lot of messing around with. Just to briefly digress here, one of the things that was frustrating me as a beginner Android developer is I found that linear layouts were very often super useful, but they also happen to have the biggest impact on performance. So was really happy to be working with, so because of that I switched to mostly using relative layouts, and then to be given the coordinator layout, not the coordinator layout. I wish they didn't name it that my brain always confuses coordinator layout with constraint layout, because yeah, anyways, first world problems. So I think I actually just forgot what I was about to say because I confused myself, so let's carry on. This is why I don't like it when people call me a genius, because I forget what I'm saying as I'm saying it. Okay, let's hop into styles. Yeah. And we'll make another one. And so we'll say login header dot, I don't know, I'm basically making this shit up as I go, dot sub. I want it to be a little smaller, and I would like it to be, let's try medium. That's going to be Roboto medium. And let's see how that looks once I add it in. Oops, nope. Let's go style, login header. Oops, yeah, that's what I want. Sub. Okay, that's reasonable. I might want it a little smaller, but now I'm getting especially nitpicky. Let's try 18. And we'll give it something useful to say. So that'll be current status will either be signed in or signed out. Okay, that's fine. As you can see, I'm not going crazy with this user interface here. I don't typically like to until later on. And okay. So we're at the hour mark. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap it up pretty quickly here. Yeah, no, good point, Isaiah. I'm being a total dumbass with my inheritance here, so, you know, bear with me. Good point. Okay, so yeah, I'm going to call it quits pretty quick here, so just because we're at the hour mark. If you have any final questions or closing comments, do me a favor and ask them right now. I'm just going to spend a couple more moments, and I'll just wait around for a couple minutes and we'll see where we go from there. Anyways, so what I'm going to have to do next is I need to add a Google sign-in button. So what I'll do for the last step of this particular live stream is I'm going to go into note list logic test, and I'm just going to check and see if I actually have a test for when somebody clicks the login button on new note. I don't think I did add that yet. On start. Okay, I do have on login click, and it does call start user auth activity, but I don't think I implemented that in the view. So I think that's something I ought to do, but let me just make sure that that part is working properly. Oi blin. Compilation error. Oh yeah, I'm sure it's screaming at me because of login test. Yeah, that's fine. I'll worry about that crap later. So, yeah, that's basically it. Hopefully that was a useful episode. We covered a lot of ground there, and I feel really happy about today's episode because I got to kind of show everyone a bit of everything today, and so that was really great. And thank you so much for watching. Great comments. Great guy. And yeah, that's basically it. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next live stream. So next stream will be the Sunday Q&A at the regular time, and if you have lengthier questions, then that would be the time to check them out. And in closing, if you enjoyed what I talked about today, please do me please do me a favor and hit the like button down below. Peace out, y'all.